The greatsword user pulled back his blade and made a big, meaty swing forward. As he did so, his fellow knight jumped on the dull of the blade, resulting in the knight being propelled rapidly towards Alice.
Alice!
Now, we arrive at Kirito and Alice being imprisoned under the church. Upon arrival, Kirito would manage to get a little bit of sleep, but not much, as the thoughts of those waiting for him in the real world would plague him. As for Alice, she would get no sleep at all. The back-to-back mind rally experiences of murdering somebody, then finding out her long-lost friend was alive, but seemingly completely different from usual, that was all weighing really heavily on her mind. She had used the quiet to essentially think about it all and try to organize her thoughts as well as her feelings. Eventually, being interrupted by Kirito, who suddenly sat up.
So, you're awake.
Sorry. I have been for a while. Did I wake you up?
As if I could sleep. I think only you have the power to do so in this kind of situation.
So, how are you holding up? I have found that talking about it actually does help a bit. If you're up for it, of course.
Okay.
Here, Alice would confide in Kirito. She had told him about the events of that day before already, however now she would go more into the emotional impact that it had on her. For Hyujo in this situation, he could have tried to put up a fruitless resistance against the Integrity Knight taking Alice, but ultimately he was powerless in that situation. Thus, what he felt was not the same kind of intense guilt that Alice feels. From her perspective, she had caused the whole event, robbing the life of her best friend, and all for the sake of a childish endeavor. It haunted her for years, plaguing her with nightmares even. She had buried herself in her studies of the sacred arts, not only because it was her passion, not even only to turn her mind's attention away from the demons that were plaguing her during this early period, but because she held out just that little bit of hope that one day, if she fully realized all of her potential and mastered the sacred arts, that she could find a way to perhaps go back and avert the tragedy that had occurred on that day. It was a big part of why she wanted to go and study in the capital. She was just hesitant about committing to do so due to both her responsibilities as the daughter of the head chief of the village, as well as the fact that it had almost felt wrong for her to pursue something that would bring her joy. She shouldn't be alive. She was the one who should have been executed. Hyujo could never experience joy again, or so she thought at least. So even if one of the driving factors for her to pursue her passion was to right the wrongs that she had caused, it still left her with these conflicting feelings that made her indecisive. As the years went by, she had managed to bury those feelings as best as she could. She never forgot them, obviously, but she would try to not let them dominate her thoughts every moment of every day, as it had been to that point. But then, after it all, ending up as a sinner anyway, now to be executed by the church, it brought those feelings back. It was all for naught. What had Hyujo even died for? And even seeing him again, the night to bring her to execution no less, it all felt just so tragically ironic, fully opening the floodgates to all that she had tried to contain deep within her. He didn't seem to care for her in the slightest, and honestly, could she blame him? Now she felt just a bit lost, confused, and unsure what to make of it all. Kirito, who had been carefully listening this whole time, would speak now that she had finished. As I mentioned before, he could relate to how she was feeling to an extent due to his experiences in Aincrad, and so he told Alice what helped him and also Sinon when he shared it with her, that these burdens are something that we as people may never get over, but it's important to recognize that it wasn't all for naught. By existing, she had had a big positive influence. If she wasn't there in Rulid, all those villages would have almost certainly perished, even Kirito himself. If she wasn't there, Ronnie and Tias would have gone through something that could be considered even worse than death. She has the right to, and should, also think about the people who are better off for encountering her. Considering that can hopefully bring some solace to her wounded soul. From the way Kirito spoke, Alice would be able to tell that what he was saying was coming from a place of experience. Putting it into a new perspective like this for her may even be enough to compel her to tears. I imagine Kirito would want to hug her again at this moment, or at the very least pat her on the back, but sadly, the chains that bound him prevented him from doing so. And so, the two would simply sit and take in the weight of the moment. After an appropriate amount of time had passed, Kirito would bring up the topic of escape. After all, they would never find out anything if they were to die here tomorrow. To that, Alice could agree. She had to know what happened to Hyujo between when he was taken and now. So, to escape this prison originally, Kirito and Hyujo grinded their chains together until they broke. These chains were extremely strong, but they were of the same object authority. When things of the same object authority clash, they shave away at each other's life values. Kirito and Hyujo could do this because they had very high object control authority from their encounter with the Goblin Scout Party and subsequently their training. Initially, you would think Kirito and Alice would just be screwed here, as Alice is a mage. She couldn't just use sacred arts to get them out either, as the location of the prison blocks the ability to do so. But actually, she wouldn't have to use sacred arts for them to escape. They could escape via the exact same method as before. This is because Alice would actually have a very high object control authority, maybe even higher than Hyujo's and Kirito has now, and she was there as the cornerstone of the defense against Rulid, slaying countless goblins and as such rapidly increasing her object control authority. But not only that, she had also killed Rayos, which gave her a very significant boost as well. So she would actually easily be able to handle these chains in order to make the escape. After they managed to shatter the chains, Kirito and Alice would make their escape. Upon exiting the prison area, Alice would use sacred arts to convert the two chains attached to their arms into a makeshift sword for Kirito. It would be a crude creation, but it was better than being defenseless should they encounter any resistance. Speaking of which, here is where another significant change would occur. Originally, here Eldery was guarding the area under the orders from Alice. However, I don't believe anyone would be guarding the area this time, as Eldery commented on just how insane Alice's intuition was. This is something I can believe, as remember, Alice was not just a protege among Rulid, but even considered so among the Integrity Knights. While Hyujo would have been good for sure, I don't believe this kind of intuition would come to him. Thus, Kirito and Alice would be able to freely roam the church gardens, completely undetected. Here, they would probably slowly and carefully make their way towards the church itself, as, after all, that is where all their answers lie. Now, there wasn't anyone patrolling the ground floor of the church at the time, as it's a restricted area that the public can't access, and crimes just simply don't happen in the underworld pretty much. However, if Alice and Kirito kept wandering around aimlessly like this, they were bound to be caught by an Integrity Knight sooner or later, at which point they would be synthesized or used to make a death robot. This was something Cardinal could not allow, so as the duo went to explore a nearby room in an attempt to gather some information, instead I think Cardinal would now pull them into her pocket dimension. Now, you may be thinking to yourself that Cardinal might not recruit these two, as Alice is not a swordsman like Hyujo was. However, the position Cardinal was in, she really could not afford to be picky. In terms of just war ability, she was a complete match for Quinella. The problem was, the body she commanded was far inferior to Quinella. Not only was her muscle memory messed up due to being drastically shorter in stature than she was used to being for nearly 150 years, but also she has much less reach than Quinella does. So, when the battle inevitably turns into a physical contest once more, Cardinal would be severely outmatched. This is before even factoring in that the duel may not even be one-on-one. Quinella now has quite a few Integrity Knights assisting her. Individually, they may not be a match for Cardinal, but she would not be able to fend them off while also being pinned by Quinella. Thus, Cardinal needed some allies of her own. The problem being that the citizens of the underworld dare not even harbor thoughts of doubt against the church. If they ever did, it would very quickly be repressed by the Eye Seal. So, acting out in full rebellion was completely out of the question. Sure, occasionally over extremely long periods of time, individuals did pop up that possessed the capability to maybe one day go against the church, making for ideal allies for Cardinal. However, these individuals were being monitored by Quinella. At the first instance of any signs of rebellion, they would be taken in by the church. There, they would be turned into obedient puppets or fed to making death robots. So, as you can see, this created a bit of an impossible situation for Cardinal pretty much. It was at the point where she almost gave up, considering even bartering her own life to Quinella in exchange for her hearing Cardinal out about the disaster that was to come. Someone this desperate did not have the luxury of passing up on Kirito and Alice. At this point, they were the best possible allies that she could hope for. Plus, Cardinal knew Kirito was not from the underworld. As such, he could not be manipulated by Quinella's alteration of the light cube cluster, making him especially the most ideal ally that Cardinal could hope for. Since Kirito and Alice entered Cardinal's pocket dimension unknowingly this time, rather than as a means of escape, they would most likely be very confused at the sudden shifting of location. As such, probably being on their guard when Cardinal suddenly appeared. Cardinal, however, is very calculating and very good at conversation, so I don't think she would have any trouble convincing the pair that she was not the enemy. Originally, Cardinal wanted to speak to Kirito individually. She split Kirito and Hyujo originally by offering Hyujo the opportunity to take a bath to warm his body, since he fell into the fountain in that battle against Eldery. Afterwards, Hyujo would get to read the Axiom Church version of the Underworld's history. I think Cardinal would have a bit of a harder time splitting Alice from Kirito, as for one, she didn't fall into that fountain and therefore didn't need a bath, but more importantly, I don't think reading about the history of the Underworld would be as alluring to her. Hyujo specifically was a history nerd, so it was the perfect distraction for him. But not only that, but he also wanted to know if there was anybody else in this position of being a criminal before him. While I'm sure that is also an issue that would be plaguing Alice, it would not be at the forefront of her attention. She felt as if she owed it to Hyujo to find out what had happened to him, so rather I think Alice would be more interested in pressing Cardinal for answers to that end. This would put Cardinal in a difficult position, so I think she would offer Alice a proposition. She would tell Alice all she could in relation to Hyujo the Integrity Knight, but in exchange, she must first speak to Kirito individually, for a while at least. This would probably frustrate Alice, as I don't imagine she would have much patience in relation to this topic right now. However, Kirito would interject. He also had an interest in hearing Cardinal out, as obviously her name being what it was in the full dive world could not be a coincidence. So he asked Alice nicely if she could give him a chance, to which she sighed and then begrudgingly agreed, taking up Cardinal's offer to go eat some food and recover in the meantime. Now, just like before, Cardinal would explain to Kirito how the world came to be in its current state, the rise of Quinella, the nature of the Integrity Knights, and the threat of the final Lord experiment, ultimately requesting to help topple Quinella and avert the Dark Territory invasion. Since their goals aligned and Kirito could not think of a better plan on the spot, he would agree. However, with the caveat that should he think of a better way to save the underworld than revert everything to null, they would go with that instead. So, with that settled, Cardinal and Kirito would head to the dining table and join Alice.
So, what's the deal?
Well, basically this person's goal is to defeat Administrator and get reinstated as the highest minister, you see. So, we decided to form an alliance.
I see. Well, if she was once the highest minister, then she should know what happened to Eugeo. It's time for you to keep up your end of the bargain.
Cardinal would answer Alice's brashness with a wry smile, going on to explain that the amount of information she had is limited due to only being able to view the world through familiars. Thus, she didn't know exactly what happened to Hyujo specifically once he was taken from Rulid. What she did know, however, is the process of how people are turned into Integrity Knights. So, here, Cardinal would explain to Alice the intricacies of the Synthesis ritual, how each Integrity Knight had their personal memories stripped from them and instead replaced by a piety module that implanted fake memories and influenced that individual to be loyal to the church.
Goddesses above,
Learning this was deeply disturbing for Alice. She had already been struggling with her guilt resurfacing as it was. Now she knew that not only was her best friend's life unfairly robbed from him, but also he was turned into a puppet to dance at the command of a fake deity, all because of her carelessness. Here, Kirito would grab Alice's shoulder. The warmth of his hand helped ease her anxiety.
It's okay. I'm here for you.
Thank you. So, is there a way to reverse this process? Can Yujio's memories be restored?
Cardinal would nod in response to Alice's question, going on to explain that if they retrieved his memory fragment, Yujio's piety module could be removed and his memories restored. However, the memory fragment would not be easy to obtain, as it was located in none other than Quinella's room, meaning the very top of the cathedral. Cardinal could send them straight there, but not only would they not find Yujio, but also they would be severely under-equipped to fight Quinella, as well as the fact that her Integrity Knights would come and swarm them all at once. So, instead, Cardinal's plan was to send them to the 3rd floor with 2 special daggers. The 3rd floor is where the equipment vault was located. At the equipment vault, they could arm themselves appropriately to stand a chance in this Herculean endeavor. Plus, they would encounter Yujio on their way to the 100th floor. Once they did, they could use one of those aforementioned daggers to link him with Cardinal's pocket dimension, allowing her to use sacred arts to put him into a sleep and keep him safely in her library until they had retrieved the memory fragment. Then, when upon arriving on the 100th floor, they could use the remaining dagger on Quinella, allowing Cardinal to assist in the fight against her. The only downside to this plan is that Cardinal could not come with them physically, as if she were to, then Quinella and her Integrity Knights would fight them all at once together, which Cardinal wasn't really opposed to. However, she doubted that Kirito and Alice had the confidence in their abilities to come out victorious in such a battle.
What do you think, Alice? It's a dangerous proposition. You can wait here with Cardinal if you want. I will definitely bring Yujio back to you.
What do I think? What is there to think? The real Yujio died for me on that day. If I didn't at least risk the same for him, I would never be able to sleep at night again.
I had a feeling you would say that. I'll do everything in my power to help you.
Thank you. Come to think of it, this will be the first time we have fought together since the defense of Rulid.
Indeed. Hopefully we will be a bit more successful this time.
To think you can still joke even in a situation like this. You are truly something, Kirito.
Cardinal thanked the 2 of them for being willing to help her. Here, she would warn the 2 of them to be wary of the Integrity Knight's famed signature moves, the Enhanced Armaments. This was the ability to tap into a divine object's memories in order to manifest its full power. Since Kirito and Alice did not fight Eldery, they had not seen it in action yet, so Cardinal would explain it to them in excruciating detail. After that, there was nothing left to be said. Cardinal would prepare to send them to the 3rd floor. When the 2 of them were ready, they gave each other a look of confirmation, fist bumping to express their mutual determination. Then finally, they embarked on what would be the toughest undertaking of their entire lives. Kirito and Alice exited the pocket dimension mere steps away from the equipment vault. They approached it very carefully, keeping an eye out for any Integrity Knights coming to intercept them. Cardinal had told them that their exit would be detected, so it was not a matter of if they would meet Integrity Knights, just when. Thus far, however, luck had appeared to be on their side as they entered the equipment vault without encountering any resistance. Here is where we would encounter another pretty big change. As you're well aware, there is no Night Sky Sword in this timeline. The Giga Cedar tree still stands strong and tall. Cardinal could not make Kirito a custom weapon either, as in order to make an object with that high of an authority, something had to be given up in exchange. Cardinal could have converted her staff, but I think it's pretty unlikely she would have done so, as she would need it for when they eventually fight Quinella. Plus, there is barely any difference between her using her staff to make him a weapon and him just taking one from the armory, as either way, he is not going to have a personal connection with the blade. So, in that case, it's better if Kirito just takes one from the vault so Cardinal can retain her staff. While I'm sure Kirito would have no problem finding a blade that suited him, after all the world's divine objects were stored in this one vault pretty much. The problem is that Kirito would not be able to use the armament enhancement arts due to not having that personal connection with the blade. With that out of the way, upon entering the vault, the room would be shrouded in darkness. Alice illuminated the room with her sacred art, revealing a seemingly endless display of high-quality equipment, encompassing numerous different types and styles.
What are you doing?
Which one do you think I should pick, Alice? The hilt on this one feels so comfortable. It's like I'm gripping a sponge. But the crossguard on this one has a much better design. I feel like it would protect me much more consistently compared to the first one. But then this one has a very pristine edge. I can just tell its cutting power is far superior.
Does it matter? Just pick one. What about this one?
It's too light for my preference. I'm looking for something with some weight to it.
The only time I have seen you this passionate is when it comes to food.
The sword a swordsman chooses is not just a tool, but an extension of oneself. If I rush my decision here, it could spell disaster for us later.
Equally, if you spend too long here, the Integrity Knights may just get bored and come capture us before you even have a weapon to defend yourself.
Good point. I'll hurry up.
You know, it's strange to think this may be the last time we get to engage in just idle banter.
True. Next time we will have Yu-Gi-Oh with us. It probably won't be the same. I'll look back fondly on these days when it was just the two of us.
You're certainly confident.
Not a doubt in my mind.
Thank you, Kirito.
Not sure what you mean. Oh, this one feels good!
Having finally found a sword that suited his tastes, Kirito would give it a few practice swings before sheathing it and attaching it to his back. Alice herself had taken the liberty of taking a staff that she liked the look of. Not only would it act as a catalyst for any sacred arts that she casted, but also had just been on her mind since she saw cardinals, awakening a desire that she never knew that she had. Finally, the two would briefly separate to change into the uniforms that they found in the armory. Just like before, Kirito selected the most protective, lightweight clothing he could find, as he was not accustomed to moving in heavy armor. Any encumberment against such powerful foes could mean death for them, so he had to go with what was familiar. As for Alice, she opted for enchanted robes. These would boost her natural abilities with the sacred arts and offer decent physical resistance. The two didn't have much time to admire their new appearances, however, as almost immediately after changing, a barrage of arrows slammed into the vault entrance. The door swung open, revealing Dursabolt. The Integrity Knight stood firm atop the stair landing, bow in hand, drawn and ready to fire. With no hesitation, he released his next volley.
Alice, step back!
System call! Generate aerial element!
Before the arrows could find their mark, they were scattered by Alice's wind art. She had immediately recognized this particular Integrity Knight, the same one who had taken Yu-Gi-Oh from her and condemned him to this fate all those years ago. As I mentioned before, Alice had no particular love for Integrity Knights. If anything, she held a grudge against this one in particular. Back then, she was powerless to do anything. Not this time, Bo.
System call! Generate umbral element!
The knight had prepared his next volley of arrows, but Alice was simply a step quicker, discharging her dark art before he had had a chance to draw. The void surged forth, consuming anything in its path, actually forcing the Integrity Knight to leap to the side in order to avoid being banished into oblivion. Firing his next volley of arrows as he did so, a soft screech could be heard as the arrows split the air on the way to their target. But again, Alice was ready. At this moment, the knight's posture was ruined. He was mid-air and therefore unable to move freely. The arrows were coming at Alice in a straight trajectory from him to her. She would seize this opportunity, combining both offense and defense to end this engagement now. Summoning the rage born forth from her feelings of guilt and powerlessness, she called forth what would basically become her signature move at this point.
System call! Generate thermal element!
The Inferno roared forward, disintegrating the arrows in his path and cleanly striking the Integrity Knight. The impact viciously knocked the knight into the wall behind him. There he laid slumped, the flames very quickly engulfing his body. Alice finally allowed herself to relax, turning behind her to see a bewildered Kirito. He knew Alice was a powerful sacred arts user already from the defense of Rulid, but this display was on a whole other level from even that. It was almost unbelievable how much she had improved since joining the Mages Guild. For a moment, he imagined just how great it would be to have her back in ALO. They didn't have a pure mage player among their ranks, and having such strong backline support could propel their group into the upper echelons. However, he would quickly halt that train of thought and refocus on the task at hand, noticing that the Integrity Knight was getting back to his feet, still engulfed by the flames, seemingly chanting something as he did so.
Sorry, I got a bit carried away there. That knight is the—
Move!
Kirito leapt forward, shoving Alice behind him as he did so. In this moment, the Integrity Knight unleashed his enhanced armament, firing a phoenix-shaped blaze towards him 10 times the intensity of any attack fired thus far. Kirito received the strike with his spinning shield sword skill. The display of the clash left Alice taken aback. She would have died in this moment. It was hubris to think that she had dispatched the knight so easily. Kirito, on the other hand, had not only read what was coming, but had saved her with only mere seconds to react. If they were going to succeed in this quest of toppling the church, she needed to be a lot more careful from here on out.
Now or never, Alice!
Right, on it.
Kirito's call-out brought her back to her senses, based on the fact that the knight stood so casually while still embodied by the flames, as well as the attack he was using on Kirito. Alice could see where she went wrong.
If that's the case, then how about this? System call! Generate aqueous element!
Alice summoned a tornado that rapidly crashed into the knight, easily gobbling him up. The knight swirled there, helplessly grasping at his throat as his lungs screamed for oxygen, eventually passing out. Alice watched carefully. When she was sure that he was no longer conscious, she froze the water spout, resulting in the knight being imprisoned in a tomb of ice. She had actually been tempted to let the Integrity Knight die, but Kirito had encouraged her not to cross that line if possible. After all, he even tried to save Rayos, even though that guy was complete subhuman garbage. If she had just coldly murdered the knight here, Kirito would likely never look at her the same again. So, in the end, she managed to quell her rage and freeze him. I imagine Alice would take a moment here to inspect the entombed knight, as if this sight was a nice mental affirmation for her, that she had come a long way since that powerless little girl in Rulid, that now she finally had it within her to forge a path to the end and right what was wrong. Here, she suddenly felt a hand on her shoulder.
We can do this.
You're right. Oh, are you hurt? Sorry for hesitating back there. Let me heal you.
It's no big deal. I barely got tagged.
Nuh-uh. No getting out of this. We've got to be in top condition for every fight.
Thanks.
After Alice finished healing Kirito, the two set off up the stairs leading to the next floor. After climbing the stairs for quite some time, bar one stopped to consume rations due to Kirito's complaints, the duo would arrive at the 32nd floor. Here is where they would encounter two small girls dressed in nun outfits. This surprised both Kirito and Alice, as the whole church was aware of their presence. To encounter two young girls in the middle of what had become a battlefield was shocking to say the least. They introduced themselves as Linal Synthesis 28 and Fizzle Synthesis 29, asking bluntly if Kirito and Alice were the Dark Territory invaders storming their way through the church. Here, originally, Kirito just didn't want to deal with the situation, so he let Hyujo handle it. I'm pretty sure this is what he would do again, thrusting the responsibility towards Alice, much to her annoyance. Now, the innocent nature of the two girls contrasted against their really blunt speech as what threw Hyujo and Kirito off in this conversation initially. That, combined with the insane speed of execution, allowed the two girls to paralyze them originally. However, I'm not really convinced they'd be able to do the same thing again here. Kirito had figured out that they were not just simply apprentice sisters as they claimed, as if they were, they would not be able to ignore the order from the church for all non-combatants to stay in their rooms. Also, he had noticed that their sheaths were made of material resistant to poison. That's just not something an apprentice sister would have. Alice, I think, would also be much more on her guard here compared to Hyujo. The reason being is that she had learned her lesson from her earlier blunder against Dursabol, swearing that from here on out she would not be so careless again, leading her to be very untrusting of the two of them. So, unlike Hyujo, she would not allow the two of them to get close to her, nor would she get swept up in their provocative dialogue, making sure that there was a good distance between them at all times, leaving Linnell and Fizzle no choice but to force it by rushing down Alice and Kirito, something I don't think they would be opposed to, considering that agility was their greatest strength, other than killing efficiency of course. Because they were so fast, they would probably almost succeed even, as there's no way that Alice could finish chanting a sacred art in time before they got to her. However, with this extra distance between them, Kirito would almost certainly be able to react to their advance, as he's kept up with much faster girls than them in his time. This bought more than enough time for Alice to finish her chant, binding the two of them with thick, thorny vines. I think Kirito would even go so far as to hit both of them with the hilt of his blade, ensuring that they were knocked out, allowing Linnell and Fizzle to eventually free themselves from this bind, but not so soon that they could catch up with Kirito and Alice. After confirming that the two of them were indeed out cold, Kirito and Alice would continue their ascent of the church. After some time climbing many stairs, Kirito and Alice eventually arrived at the 50th floor. The two opened the door and expected to find yet another empty generic room. However, to their surprise, their next opponents were stood there waiting for them.
Welcome, criminals.
Finatio quickly inspected the duo.
I see one of you is a sacred arts user. As much as it pains me to partake in an unfair fight, unfortunately for you, we have been strictly ordered to erase both of you using all means available, should you make it to this point. So this is as far as you will go. Enhance armament!
Immediately after declaring this, Finatio started chanting a sacred art. Kirito and Alice both recognized it. It was slightly different, but in essence, it was very similar to what Dercibot had used against them. The famed signature move of the Integrity Knights that Cardinal had warned them about, the enhanced armament. Given the lack of information they had on the skill that she was going to use, and the power of the one that Dercibot had used against them, there was only one choice. Rush down Finatio before she got the chance to fire it off freely. Kirito and Alice gave each other an affirming nod, and then Kirito kicked off the ground hard, dashing straight for Finatio. Meanwhile, Alice started chanting a sacred art of her own. To their surprise, however, the four knights with Finatio were extremely quick to act. Two of them intercepted Kirito while the other two ran straight for Alice. Kirito saw this and attempted to run back to assist her. However, his attempt was thwarted by the heavy pressure from the two knights pinning him.
Alice!
Their speed was frightening, but Alice did not buckle, leaping back while firing off her cryogenic sacred art. She didn't expect it to hit, as these knights are not incompetent. However, since she fired it off low, it froze the ground beneath them, making it much harder for them to approach, giving her enough time to make her next move. However, what came next was completely outside of Alice's expectations. You see, these four knights, known as the Four Orsilian Blades, excelled in teamwork. One could even argue it was their specialty, having gone under extensive training led by Finatio. As a unit, they were formidable, playing off each other perfectly in almost all scenarios. As such, they did not attempt to run across the frozen area that Alice had created. Instead, the greatsword user pulled back his blade and made a big, meaty swing forward. As he did so, his fellow knight jumped on the dull of the blade, resulting in the knight being propelled rapidly towards Alice. She tried her best to evade, but the knight was just simply too quick, scoring a deep blow across Alice, dropping her to the floor. There she laid, unconscious and slowly bleeding out.
Alice!
Scenes of the times Kirito had failed to protect those dear to him flashed through his mind. Surely this could not be happening again. He could not allow it to happen again. With that battle cry, Kirito roused himself to press forward, summoning every ounce of strength he had within to defy his fate, knocking back the knight on him, then slashing viciously towards the throat of the knight ahead of him. Before he could connect, however, his blade was met with another. The two knights that had gone after Alice had returned. The four of them formed a box formation around Kirito, a formation that they had drilled countless times before, slowly dissecting his defense with the precision of a surgeon. Kirito was no stranger to 1vx battles, and so he held his own quite well, but against opposition of this caliber, keeping it together was extremely hard, resulting in him receiving tags here and there, but he did not break, waiting for his opportunity to strike back, and that opportunity came when Kirito slipped underneath one of the slashes. With Kirito being on his back, another knight saw this as an opportunity to end the fight here and swung down to deliver the coup de grace. However, Kirito had positioned himself in such a way that his legs were at the legs of the knight whose attack he had slipped. He kicked the knight's legs hard, resulting in the knight falling on Kirito. The second knight could not stop his swing returning in time and thus impaled his sword in his comrade's back. This riled the knight, and Kirito did not miss the opportunity, quickly recovering and cutting him down. With their formation now shattered, Kirito could not waste any more time. He had to finish Finatio before she cast her enchanted armament and then save Alice. Thus, he used a classic sword skill of his to rapidly close the gap between himself and Finatio, Sonic Leap. However, even that move was a step too slow.
Enhance armament!
Kirito was met midair with a ray of light, penetrating his left flank cleanly without sound, causing Kirito to miss his attack on Finatio and fall to his knee upon landing. Kirito barely got a chance to recover as a barrage of rays came for him one after another. Due to his godlike intuition, Kirito managed to dodge most of them, but finally another would pierce him, causing Kirito to crash to the floor, posture completely crumpled. With him now completely at Finatio's mercy, she would go on to explain the nature of her sword. After all, talking to her opponents when she was on the verge of victory was a bad habit of hers that she did acknowledge.
Farewell, immature and foolish criminal.
Discharge!
Just like before, Kirito reflected Finatio's attack with a mirror made from the sacred arts, resulting in her helmet being knocked clean off her, revealing that she was female. This distressed Finatio, as she actually loves a good fight, but she was extremely tilted by her opponents disrespecting her by holding back, despite her overwhelming strength just because she was a woman. This allowed Kirito to regain his bearings. Here, originally Kirito monologues her a little himself, pointing out how silly it is for her to be concerned over such a thing, that he had no intention of holding back, for his chivalry for women in this sense had been beaten out of him a long time ago. I'm sure he may even say something similar here, but a much shorter version of it for sure, as he himself was currently really distressed over Alice's condition. So, feeling the need to close the distance and end the fight here, I believe he would go back to old Reliable, the skill that he had used the most since Aincrad, the skill that he had been avoiding due to its association with the Black Swordsman, Vorpal Strike. His blade would light up, spitting sparks of crimson red. Then he propelled forward like an arrow, blade roaring with the sound of a jet engine. Had it been most other opponents here, Kirito may have won in this very instance, but Finatio is one of the Integrity Knight's strongest and most skilled members, so I actually think she would receive the strike. Not only that, but being pleased about doing so, seeing clearly now that Kirito has no intent of holding back. The resulting feedback would blow the two away from each other, and at this point Kirito had to be reaching the upper limits of his stamina. Being separated was not good, however, as in a long-range battle he will be annihilated by Finatio. So he grit his teeth and kept up the relentless aggression, pressing forth and trying to push Finatio onto the back foot. However, she did not bend, welcoming his assault and engaging in a deadly match in the pocket. Both fighters exchanging at a speed the likes of which only the pinnacle of those who take up the blade can keep up with, neither willing to take the first backward step. Eventually, the two would connect with a heavy blow to each other's blades, resulting in another knockback and a brief pause in the fighting.
Criminal. It appears you really are different from those fools I have fought before. There haven't been as many men able to try and kill me this seriously once they saw this abominable vessel until now.
Abominable, huh? This is senseless. What the church is doing is wrong. I know you can't see that. But I'm fighting to overthrow the church and highest minister, to enable humans like you to love and live normally, to save the citizens of this world from annihilation, where the Pontifex is more interested in purely controlling them.
I see that you're not a minion of darkness, as what was told to us. However, child, you are naive. If the church's authority was lost, who knows what sort of hell this world would be thrust into? The army of the Dark Territory strengthens their forces day after day, clamoring beyond the mountain range at the end that seals them away. You are the one endangering this world. Thus, I must defeat you, even if I had to disregard my pride as a knight to do so. Release recollection!
Finatio's blade shone brighter than it had this whole time thus far, shooting deadly beams of light rapidly and indiscriminately across the whole room, some of which pierced Kirito. At this point, he was on the verge of collapse, but if any of those beams hit Alice, she was done for. So he desperately charged forward, trying one final time to cut Finatio down. However, she easily received the strike. With no follow-up this time, and Kirito being in much worse shape than she was from taking multiple ray strikes up to this point, Finatio easily knocked Kirito back, following by piercing him more times with her rays of light, causing Kirito's HP to finally drop to 0, ejecting him from the simulation. And with him went all hope of toppling Quinella. With Kirito gone, Finatio would stop Alice's bleeding and bring her to Quinella. As Finatio is an honorable knight, I could see her preventing death where it was needless. This of course would result in her being sympathized more than likely. There's also a chance Finatio just lets Alice bleed to death. She is still a criminal in Finatio's eyes after all. It's hard to say which one is more likely, you guys can decide for yourself, but for me personally, I'm leaning towards her stopping Alice's bleeding. So, in a funny way, she would end up being reunited with Yujo, doomed to forever serve as Quinella's puppet alongside him. Thank you for watching the video, guys. This one was for all the people excitedly asking for part 3 in the comments of part 2. It really touched my heart, and I really hope that part 3 managed to live up to your expectations. I'm sorry it took so long, guys, but this isn't the end of the story. There is one last final part left, and it may be the most ambitious part of them all. These take so long and so much effort to make. I must have gone through literally every single frame of Alice at this point. Even a pretty significant amount of money has been spent on this point on all the sprites for the dialogue parts. So, if you guys want to see the final part and the end of this long journey, make it known. Share the video with other SAO fans, comment what you liked about this part and how much you want to see part 4. If this video gets past 5,000 views, then I'll release the last part in this epic story. So yeah, I'm looking forward to what you guys have to say, and like always, I'll catch you guys in the next one. Bye bye.